You can measure the depth of a man's love not by how loudly he declares it, but by the stillness and strength in the way he speaks to you. Pause for a moment. Let that sink in. Most people have been conditioned to associate love with excitement, dramatics, or intensity. But in truth, genuine love, especially from a man who has cultivated emotional mastery, expresses itself with grounded words, spoken not to gain attention, but to give it. Not to control, but to connect. When a man deeply loves you, his language changes. His voice softens, not out of weakness, but out of reverence. His tone slows, not out of hesitation, but out of carefulness. His words shift, not to impress you, but to include you. These are not just romantic gestures. They are physiological, psychological, and spiritual signals that he has stopped speaking from his surface mind and has begun communicating from his core. His love no longer comes from a place of needing to be chosen, but from a place of already having chosen you. Fully, quietly, and without condition. When a man deeply loves, something profound begins to shift, not just in his behavior, but in the subtle rhythms of his nervous system. The way he speaks changes. Not in volume, not in drama, but in vibration. His words begin to carry a kind of resonance, like a drum that's been hollowed, and now knows how to echo with meaning. In moments of true love, the male body moves out of survival mode. The sympathetic nervous system, often alert and ready to protect or compete, quiets. Instead, the parasympathetic system, the one responsible for rest, connection, and healing, takes over. This is not just poetic, it's biological. When a man feels emotionally safe, his heartbeat slows, his breathing deepens, and his voice begins to reflect calm rather than control. He's not trying to prove himself, he's trying to share himself. You'll notice that he doesn't rush to fill silence. He pauses between his sentences, not because he's unsure, but because he's present. He's listening as much as he's speaking. In fact, his silence says more than words often can. It communicates trust. He trusts you with his pauses, with his breath, with the space between his thoughts. Many women say they long for a man who will speak with intention. But intention doesn't begin in language. It begins in the body. It begins when a man is no longer operating out of fear, competition, or the old wounds of being misunderstood. It begins when he realizes that the goal is not to be impressive, but to be attuned. There's a simple story of a retired martial artist who once fell in love late in life. People noticed how calm he became. They said, "He used to speak like fire. Now he speaks like water." Someone asked him why. He said, "Because before her, I was always preparing to fight. But now I'm learning how to stay." This story, brief as it is, holds a mirror to the nervous system of a man in love. His system, once armored, becomes a garden, and from that garden, different words begin to grow. He starts saying things like, "I heard you," instead of, "I don't have time for this." He says, "What do you need right now?" rather than, "You're overreacting." And he begins to say, "I want to understand, even if I don't agree." These aren't just phrases. They are physiological markers of emotional regulation. He is no longer driven by impulse. He is responding from presence. There is something deeply spiritual about this transition. The body calms, and the heart finally gets a chance to speak. And the heart does not shout. It speaks gently, because it knows anything real doesn't need to be forced. Women who have experienced this kind of energy in a man often describe it as feeling held, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, even energetically. It is the sense that his words are not knives to cut or ladders to climb, but bridges. And each bridge leads not away from her, but closer to her. This kind of communication does not emerge without practice. It often follows struggle. Many men spend years learning to speak from their minds, from logic, from facts and defense mechanisms, but to speak from a calm body. This requires a kind of surrender. A man must be brave enough to let go of performance. He must be humble enough to sit with discomfort, to breathe through it, and to remain present. And what does this presence give to a woman? Everything. Because when a man is not speaking to control her, she finally feels safe to unfold. When his nervous system is stable, her emotional body begins to trust. And that trust is the foundation of all real intimacy. There is no real love without safety. And there is no safety without a man who has learned how to calm his own storm. The words of a man in love will begin to sound less like declarations and more like invitations. He says, "Tell me how you feel," because he's not afraid of her feelings anymore. He says, "I'm here," because he's not planning his escape. He says, "Let's take our time," because he understands that real connection cannot be rushed. The nervous system has its own tempo, and love, at its deepest level, always moves at the speed of truth. In one conversation, a woman shared how her partner would always text her several times a day when they were first dating, but those messages often felt like obligations. "Good morning. How was your day?" They were there, but they were hollow. Then one day, he sent her a voice message. His voice was slow, steady. He said, "I just wanted you to hear how calm I feel when I think of you." That single sentence, spoken with presence, shifted everything. It was no longer about quantity. It was about quality. His nervous system had caught up with his heart. The body does not lie. You can hear when someone is calm. You can feel it in the way they say your name, in the way they pause after you speak, in the way they don't try to fix everything but instead offer their presence. Love is not about fixing. It is about witnessing, without flinching. And this leads us into the second transformation that occurs when a man deeply loves. He begins to speak from his essence, not his ego. The ego always seeks something. It wants validation, control, power, or admiration. When a man speaks from ego, his words are coated in performance. He is trying to win. He might use charm, wit, or even silence as tools to stay ahead. He measures conversations like chess games. What move will give him the upper hand? This kind of energy is exhausting, not just for the woman, but for the man himself. Because in truth, the ego is always afraid. But love, real love, does not emerge from fear. It arises from the essence of who someone is, and essence has no need to compete. When a man begins to love deeply, he no longer wants to impress. He wants to express. There's a fundamental shift from seeking to being, and with that shift comes a new vocabulary. Instead of saying, "Look at what I did for you," he might say, "This made me think of you." Instead of saying, "You're lucky to have me," he begins to say, "I'm grateful we found each other." His tone softens. His phrases stop being self-centered. They become relational. He moves from me to we. This is a kind of maturity that cannot be faked. It shows up in the way he owns his mistakes, in the way he says, "I was wrong and I want to do better," without defensiveness, in the way he asks, "What matters to you right now?" instead of assuming he already knows. When ego steps aside, curiosity steps in. And curiosity is one of the most sacred energies in a relationship. Because curiosity says, "You are a mystery I want to keep exploring." It says, "You are worth knowing again and again, even if I think I already know you." This kind of language is not passive, it is alive. And it keeps love from growing stagnant. There's a powerful moment that often happens in the quiet hours of deep partnership. It is when a man looks at the woman he loves, not with lust, not with entitlement, but with awe. And in that moment, his words are simple. He says something like, "I still can't believe I get to know you." These are not poetic lines rehearsed for approval. They are real-time expressions of presence. They come from a heart that is awake. This awakening doesn't happen by accident. It often comes after failure, after heartbreak, after realizing that manipulation, charm, and surface level confidence are brittle and hollow. Essence, on the other hand, is rooted. It is resilient. It speaks without fear of being misunderstood because it is not trying to be perfect. It is simply trying to be true. One man, in reflecting on his transformation after years of shallow relationships, said, "I used to say what I thought women wanted to hear. Now I say what I feel, even if it's messy. I'd rather be real than be right." That is the voice of essence speaking. That is a man who has stopped performing and started participating. And women feel the difference immediately, because words from ego often feel heavy. They come with an agenda. They twist the emotional atmosphere. But words from essence feel light, not because they lack depth, but because they are free of manipulation. They land gently. They invite openness. It's important to remember, when a man speaks from essence, he is no longer trying to control outcomes. He is not speaking to secure a label, to rush a commitment, or to dominate the emotional space. He is speaking because he values shared reality. And in shared reality, both people matter. This leads to a new kind of intimacy, not one driven by neediness or strategy, but by respect, by mutual reverence. In this space, a woman begins to relax. Her body softens. Her energy opens, not because she was convinced, but because she was met. And in being met, not manipulated, she begins to trust again. Not just in him, but in the possibility of love that is rooted, calm, and real. The journey from ego to essence is not linear. It requires humility, self-awareness, and practice. It is a path of unlearning performance and remembering presence. It is about being more human, not more perfect. And when a man begins to walk this path, his words become medicine. Not because they promise the world, but because they come from a world within him that has already been made whole. There is a kind of love that speaks without needing to say very much at all. A love that reveals itself not in grand speeches, but in subtle energies, the tone of the voice, the rhythm of the breath, the warmth behind the words. When a man deeply loves, his language shifts from performance to presence. He no longer speaks to gain admiration or to protect his ego. Instead, he speaks to connect, to co-regulate, and to honor the moment unfolding between two souls. Presence, in its deepest form, is not passive. It is a powerful act of attention. To be present with another human being, truly present, is to offer something sacred, undivided awareness. In the realm of relationships, this kind of presence becomes one of the highest forms of love. And when a man speaks from that place, his words no longer carry the need to dominate. They begin to calm, to hold, to affirm. For much of his life, a man may have learned that communication is about results, about fixing, about debating, about asserting his point of view. He may have been taught that strength is in volume, in persuasion, or in certainty. But when he falls deeply in love, a new awareness emerges. He begins to see that real strength lies in stillness. That to be heard does not require being loud, and that to be understood, he must first learn to listen, not only with his ears, but with his energy. There's a quiet wisdom that grows inside a man when he learns to be fully present with a woman, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. He starts to understand that silence isn't empty. It's a space that holds everything. In that silence, he can feel what she is truly saying, even beyond her words. He starts to notice the way her shoulders tighten when she's been carrying too much. He hears the weight in her sigh before she speaks. And when he does speak, he doesn't rush to solve her problems. He simply says, "I'm with you." Those 3 words, when spoken with presence, carry more healing than any well-rehearsed advice ever could. To speak from presence is to let go of agenda. It means a man is not trying to impress, rescue, or even perform emotional sensitivity. He is simply offering his full attention, undistracted, undivided. In today's world of constant stimulation, that is rare. We live in a culture that encourages multitasking, where people speak while scrolling, where they nod while checking their phones, where conversations are measured in replies, not resonance. And yet, the human heart yearns to be felt, not just heard. A woman knows the difference. She knows when a man is listening just long enough to speak again. And she knows when he's truly absorbing her words, holding them in the quiet of his body, allowing them to move through him. That kind of listening cannot be faked. It requires discipline. It requires slowing down the breath, setting aside the ego, and letting the other person matter more than your opinion. One evening, a woman sat across the table from her partner after a long day. She tried to explain how overwhelmed she felt. By work, by family, by the silent pressure to hold everything together. Midway through her sentence, he reached for his phone to check a notification. She stopped speaking. She didn't raise her voice. She simply became quiet. A few seconds later, he looked up and said, "You can continue." But something had already broken. She no longer felt safe to open. Not because of what he said, but because of where his attention had gone. This is the wound so many people carry, not of harsh words, but of divided presence. It is the ache of speaking into a room that isn't fully listening. But presence, real, grounded, and loving presence, heals that. When a man truly loves, he begins to treat every conversation as sacred. He places his phone face down. He leans in slightly, not out of habit, but because his body is genuinely attuned. He lets his partner finish her sentence, even if he disagrees. He breathes before responding, giving space for her emotions to settle. And when he speaks, he does so with an inner stillness that says, "I value this connection more than being right." This shift may seem small, but its impact is massive. Emotional presence is one of the most powerful regulators of the nervous system. When two people are attuned, when their energies are not at war, a deep peace emerges. Arguments become dialogues, tension becomes intimacy, and in this sacred space, love deepens, not through gifts or declarations, but through the gentle act of being with each other fully. There's a man who once described the moment he realized he had been performing in relationships. He said, "I used to say the right things, ask the right questions, and pretend to listen. But inside, I was planning what I'd say next." I didn't realize that love doesn't ask you to perform. It asks you to pause, to stop being clever and start being real. That awakening changed the way he spoke. He stopped using words to steer the conversation and started using silence to support it. This is the transformation that happens when a man steps into emotional maturity. He stops speaking from his head alone and begins to speak from the fullness of his being. There is a warmth in his voice, a slowness in his replies, a softness in his tone. These are not signs of weakness. They are signals of depth. A woman, in the presence of such energy, starts to relax into herself. She no longer feels the need to over-explain, to defend, or to manage his emotions. She feels met, and being met allows her to blossom, not in fear, but in freedom. Presence also teaches a man to become aware of his emotional triggers. In the past, he may have reacted defensively to her sadness or frustration, seeing it as an attack or an accusation. But now, with presence, he begins to understand. He listens beyond her tone. He feels her exhaustion, her longing to be understood, her fear of not being enough. And instead of reacting, he responds. He might say something as simple as, "That must be hard," or "Tell me more about what that feels like." These responses, grounded in presence, invite healing. Real communication is not just about words. It is about energy. When a man stays present, even in discomfort, he communicates, "You're safe with me." That safety is not just emotional. It is somatic. It's felt in the body. Her nervous system begins to mirror his. This is what scientists refer to as co-regulation, the way two human beings can bring each other back into calm simply by remaining emotionally attuned. This is why presence is more powerful than performance. Performance says, "Look at me." Presence says, "I'm here with you." Performance says, "Let me impress you." Presence says, "Let me understand you." And when a woman feels understood, not because a man is using perfect words, but because his energy is steady and his heart is open, love grows, trust builds, emotional walls begin to dissolve. There is a quote often shared in mindfulness circles: "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." In a world of quick fixes and shallow distractions, the ability to give someone your full attention becomes a radical act of love. A man who learns this not only transforms his relationships, but transforms himself. Because presence is not just a gift to others, it is a mirror. It reveals our own patterns, our fears, our unhealed wounds. It asks us to slow down long enough to see ourselves clearly. And so, the man who learns to speak from presence also learns to be with himself. He no longer needs to run from silence. He becomes familiar with his own emotions. He allows grief, vulnerability, and uncertainty to move through him without resistance. And that internal stillness reflects outward. His presence becomes medicine, not because he has the answers, but because he can sit with the questions. This kind of man does not rush love. He does not push conversations past their natural pace. He trusts that connection is built slowly, layer by layer, through moments of truth and shared breath. He does not dominate the dialogue. He allows it to flow. And in doing so, he invites a deeper kind of intimacy, one not based on excitement alone, but on grounded, enduring presence. A couple once described the turning point in their relationship as the night they sat on their balcony and said nothing for almost 20 minutes. They had been arguing earlier, trying to solve things with words. But that night, they just sat. No plans, no solutions, just presence. She later said, "That was the night I knew we would be okay." Not because of what he said, but because he didn't leave when there was nothing to say. This is the power of grounded love. It doesn't perform, it holds. In the end, the presence of a deeply loving man is felt before it is heard. It is in the way he looks into your eyes and stays there, not because he's searching for something, but because he's choosing to remain. It is in the way he doesn't interrupt. It is in the way he lets your emotions breathe. It is in the way he offers quiet reassurance. Not just through what he says, but through what he allows you to feel. To speak from presence is to turn conversation into communion. And in communion, two people do not just talk, they become known to one another. Not through performance, but through the sacred art of being fully, lovingly here. There comes a moment in a man's life, especially when love begins to deepen, when he is asked by life itself to develop a new kind of language. This language is not taught in classrooms or modeled in movies. It does not come from the need to impress or dominate. It comes from a deeper place, one that many men are unfamiliar with until they are truly seen by someone who invites them into emotional truth. And that someone is often the woman they love. In the early stages of many relationships, it is common for conversations to skim the surface. Words are exchanged for validation, for humor, for attraction. There is charm, there is wit, there is rhythm. But charm can only carry a relationship so far. At some point, when the soul of a woman begins to call for deeper resonance, she no longer wants just answers. She seeks presence. And more than that, she seeks a man who can speak the language of feeling, the language of his inner world. This is where many men begin to struggle. Not because they do not feel, but because they have not been taught to name what they feel. A man may feel tension in his chest, a tightness in his stomach, a lump in his throat. But when asked to describe it, he may simply respond with, "I'm fine," or "I don't know." These phrases do not reflect the absence of feeling. They reflect the absence of vocabulary. And this absence is not a personal failure. It is cultural, generational, systemic. From a young age, many boys are taught to equate emotion with weakness. Crying is shamed. Vulnerability is punished. Sensitivity is seen as something to be erased. The result is that by the time a man reaches adulthood, he may have a full emotional experience inside him, but only a handful of phrases to express it. His inner world is full, but his emotional language is underdeveloped. But something changes when he deeply loves a woman. Love, especially a love that is emotionally mature, acts as a mirror. It reflects back to a man what is not yet fully known within himself. A woman who loves him doesn't just want to hear what happened at work. She wants to know how it made him feel. She wants to understand what weighs on his heart, what keeps him awake at night, what he longs for when the world goes quiet. And slowly, often clumsily at first, he begins to search for the words. In the beginning, it might come out in incomplete sentences, in pauses, in the occasional. I don't know how to explain it. But if he continues walking this path, something begins to shift. His emotional vocabulary expands. He no longer just says, "I'm angry." He begins to say, "I felt dismissed today, like my effort wasn't valued." He no longer just says, "I'm stressed." He says, "I'm overwhelmed by the pressure to provide, and I'm afraid of failing." These are not just deeper sentences. They are revelations. They are signs that a man is becoming intimate with his own heart. And when a man becomes intimate with his inner world, everything in the relationship changes. His partner begins to feel less like she's speaking into a void and more like she's being joined in the space between. Emotional language creates a bridge. It allows two people to meet not only through logic, but through shared vulnerability. And vulnerability, when practiced with courage and presence, becomes a doorway to spiritual connection. There is a story of a couple who had been married for 12 years. The woman often expressed that she didn't feel emotionally close to her husband. He provided, he was loyal, he was present in the room. But emotionally, she felt alone. One evening, after a particularly silent dinner, she finally asked, "Do you even feel anything about us anymore?" He hesitated, stared at his plate, and quietly said, "I feel tight in my chest all the time, like there's something I need to say, but I don't know how." That sentence, simple as it was, broke open years of emotional distance, not because it was poetic, but because it was honest. It was the beginning of a man finding his voice, not his outer voice, but his emotional one. It is important to understand that emotional vocabulary is not just about words. It's about access. Access to one's inner state, access to the subtle shifts of mood and thought that often go unnoticed. A man learning to speak this way becomes more aware of his reactions. He notices when his frustration is really hiding fear. He recognizes when his silence is masking sadness. And most importantly, he begins to name these things, not just for his partner, but for himself. Naming an emotion does not weaken a man. It grounds him. Neuroscience shows that when we label a feeling, we reduce its intensity. This is known as affect labeling. By simply saying, "I feel anxious," the brain begins to deactivate the amygdala, the fear center, and activates the prefrontal cortex, which governs rational thinking. In other words, finding the right words helps us regain control. it helps us respond rather than react. So when a man says, "I'm hurt because I didn't feel included in that decision," he is not being dramatic. He is demonstrating emotional intelligence. He is choosing clarity over confusion. He is moving out of survival mode and into connection. Women often carry a tremendous emotional burden in relationships because they are expected to be the feelers, the processors, the translators. But when a man begins to meet her with equal emotional language, the dynamic shifts. The weight is shared. Communication becomes collaborative. There is a sense of us, not just you and me. And emotional vocabulary is not only for conflict. It is for joy, for admiration, for desire. A man who loves deeply doesn't just say, "You look beautiful." He says, "When I see you smile like that, I feel peaceful inside." He doesn't just say, "I'm happy to be with you." He says, "Being next to you calms something in me I didn't even know needed soothing." These are not lines from a script. They are words born from awareness, emotional awareness. There is a moment, usually quiet and unexpected, when a woman hears her partner express something emotionally real and precise for the first time. Maybe he says, "I felt insecure when you spoke to him, and I was ashamed to admit it." In that moment, her whole body softens. Not because he was perfect, but because he was real. And being real is always more powerful than being polished. Men often ask, "How do I start developing this kind of vocabulary?" The answer is simple, but not easy. It begins with listening to oneself. At the end of the day, instead of asking, "What did I do today?" ask, "What did I feel today?" Instead of brushing off emotions with, "I'm good," ask, "What's moving inside me that I haven't acknowledged?" This is not self-indulgent. This is self-awareness. And self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intimacy. Practicing emotional vocabulary